Hi everyone, from me once again for the final How to Think Like a Roman Emperor live webinar. Once again speaking to you from Nova Scotia in Canada. So if you want to just take a moment to say hi while I pour my coffee and say where you are watching from in the live chat area. Just confirm that you can see and hear me okay while I cough into the microphone. And we will begin shortly. Let me just have a quick look. Yeah, got a few people responding. Cool, I think we are good to go. Okay, so I'll do a little bit of housekeeping stuff as usual, news and updates. And then today, we don't need to preview the next section because there isn't one. We are going to review week 4 and also do a little brief review or recap of the whole course. And then again, just a little kind of wrapping up at the end. Basically, it's pretty straightforward. So how long will today last? I don't know, I'm thinking it'll probably last about half an hour. It should be a little bit shorter than the other ones because we don't have a week ahead to cover in this one. As always, if you want to address a question to me, put @Donald in the live chat area. Although I'll mention in a moment, we're going to have a discussion today in the Facebook group as well, so if you have questions, actually you might want to save them for the Facebook group, because then you'll probably get more responses from other people and it'll be a more persistent discussion. The live chat in YouTube disappears at the end of the webinar. Oh yeah, just another kind of practical thing. So even though the course is over, there'll still be quite a lot of people doing it self-paced. So you might want to go back and check some of the previous discussions. You might get emails occasionally as well if you've written a comment and then someone later comes and replies to one of your comments on the website. I think you may get an email notification about that occasionally as well. So it's worth checking back, especially if you're one of the ones that's going through the course more quickly. Have a look back at the previous discussions. So,
hello.
hi.
Go up. Oh.
Say hi.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so let's continue. The other little news updates. We have a Socrates course that we're working on at the moment, which should be available probably in a few months' time in June, but there'll be a free mini course as a kind of taster of that is kind of virtually done and should be available in the next week or two, hopefully. So I'll send out a notification about that if you're interested. And just also to remind you that you have lifetime access to this course, so you can kind of go back anytime and listen to the recordings and stuff. And also all of the webinars are recorded, and there are still links to the previous webinars from August as well if you're interested in looking at those. As I mentioned earlier, if you go to the Facebook group today, I'll do an Ask Me Anything about Marcus Aurelius, which we did last time as well, and it seemed to work quite well. Also, if you search through the archive of the Facebook group, you can, if you're interested, you can probably still find the one from last year where we had a bit of a discussion and Ask Me Anything about Marcus Aurelius and the Meditations. Okay, so just to recap briefly some of the things that we've been covering. So the course preliminary section, in case you missed any of the stuff that's in it, there are reading lists in there. Sometimes people ask me about things that maybe they've forgotten or they've missed or whatever. So if you're looking for books about Marcus Aurelius, there's a pretty good introductory reading list with notes in the preliminary section. There are some infographics there that you can download and use on your desktop as well, and that helps to maybe act as a bit of a reminder of certain things. It helps you to kind of visualise things, like there's a chronology of Marcus's life, if I remember rightly. And there's quizzes in each of the sections. Even the preliminary section, there's a quiz that you might want to go back and have another go at doing. And then there's some Marcus Aurelius wallpapers as well with quotes in them that Rossio designed. Again, as a sort of aid memoir or a cue, you might want to use those on your desktop with some of the most popular passages from the Meditations. So there's a lot of resources in there. There's also an audio exercise, which most of you probably saw, but in case you didn't, it's the self-hypnosis exercise for Stoic attitudes. And so I meet people all the time who tell me that they listen to that kind of ongoing, every day. And so that might be, something that you want to continue using after the course. In some ways, some people like to use that immediately. Other people might actually get more benefit from that recording having worked through the course, especially if they're new to Stoicism, new to the subject. And in the first week, we covered anger and empathy, but we also talked about Stoic ethics and the goal of life. So if that's still something that you're not sure about, even at this stage in the course, people sometimes have questions about that. And often the questions that are covered in there. So ask me, but also you may find that going back and reviewing that helps to clarify some of the basic principles of Stoic ethics if you're still not sure about those. There's like an hour's worth of videos, I think, broken into 3 parts that cover Stoic ethics basically. And then there's also a section on the Stoic contemplation of the sage, and we thought that was a good starting point for you to basically begin thinking about Stoicism and how to apply it in daily life. And then, let's see, there's the audio recording also in week 1 of the Stoic contemplation of the sage. And again, that's something that you might want to continue using. And that section contains the anger management strategies that Marcus calls the 10 gifts from Apollo. So that's one of the few places where he gives us a list that's fairly comprehensive of Stoic psychological strategies. And maybe, if we have time, I might kind of just rattle off a list of some of the main ones again today, just to kind of recap on those. I think I counted once, there are about 18 distinct psychological strategies that I can see in the meditations. And I tend to talk about them a lot in different webinars and podcast interviews and stuff like that. You'll find them discussed in the books that I've written about Stoicism as well, but I'll do a recap of some of them briefly today. Take a while to go through all 18, but I'll pick out some of the most common ones. There's a good list there though, right in week 1 though, where we look at the application to anger of a whole toolbox of techniques. And then in week 2 we looked at conquering worry and anxiety. So we looked at techniques like premeditation, the postponement technique, decatastrophizing, or what's sometimes called objective representation in Stoicism, and what I call Stoic catharsis, or similar to cognitive distancing in modern CBT. And then you have that recording exercise of Stoic premeditation or mindfulness as well. It's a kind of imaginal exposure based exercise. And then week 3 was about pain and illness. So we looked at viewing things objectively again, viewing pain sensations as belonging to the body, being limited in duration, separate from the mind, and think about the virtues that help us to cope with them, or the coping resources that we have. And then the week that you've just done, bringing things right back up to the present, is about coming to terms with mortality and loss. And there's a lot of stuff in it about the view from above, which is one of the most iconic, sort of popular Stoic exercises. It was one of the things that kind of got me particularly interested in Stoicism at the beginning, and the view from above also happens to be kind of how I got involved with modern Stoicism, the non-profit organisation, and how Stoic Week began. I think I may have told you that story in one of the previous webinars, so I won't go over it all again, but just kind of mentioning that there. And thinking about the contemplation of impermanence in Stoicism, how that ties into meditation of death, and seeing death as indifferent, a natural, inevitable thing, viewing it with a philosophical attitude, and so on. So the view from above audio recording, that's a revised version that you've got there. It's gone through a couple of versions, and that's also one of the most popular audio recordings for people to kind of keep going back to and listening to. So hopefully you find that helpful. Okay, so I had a brief review of the comments that you've posted in the final week, and so I'm just going to kind of respond to some of those, just as a kind of launching pad for a little bit more discussion. So one of the excerpts was how the soul injures itself, and I just think that's a really lovely passage, and it's a nice little kind of reminder. Timothy had said it's helpful to have a list like that to memorise things, that it was probably helpful for Marcus. It's maybe helpful for us as well. I think so. I mean, the Stoics look like, Marcus seems to have several of these lists, like the 10 gifts from Apollo, like this one. When I first started studying the meditations, people told me they thought it was just a kind of a random collection of notes, that there wasn't much of a structure to it. And that's not really true. I mean, in some ways it seems a little bit disorganised, but there's an underlying conceptual structure to it. Pierre Hadot talks in a very comprehensive way about that in The Inner Citadel, his book on the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. But it's fairly well known that there's this kind of underlying Stoic conceptual structure that Marcus takes for granted in the meditations, and there's a couple of different aspects to it, but there's often a tripartite or a threefold structure that he keeps referring back to, that seems to relate to the three topics of Stoicism: ethics, physics and logic. And he kind of applies that in a number of different ways throughout the whole text. You'll kind of see it recurring repeatedly, and so he has a more systematic, more structured way of thinking about things than it might seem at first. And these kind of lists and that structure, I think, helped Stoics to memorise things. And they also seem to memorise slogans or sayings as well. There's another handout. Some of you may have, some of you maybe not. You can find it on the website on learn.donaldrobertson.name. It's the main e-learning site. There's a thing called the Stoic Therapy Toolkit, which is a PDF that Rossio designed. I wrote the wording, she did the graphic design and stuff for me, so we wanted to make it kind of look nice, and that's been very popular. I think about 3,500 people I think have downloaded that now. So we wanted to give people just a really neat summary of one way of approaching a Stoic daily routine and some of the key psychological exercises. So it would take a whole book to go into those in depth, but now that you've been introduced to some of them, here this is a little kind of 5-page aid-memoir or reminder. So you might want to print that off, or just download that as a way of helping you to review things and memorise them. Wilfred mentioned that passage, how the soul injures itself, is also kind of wonderful literature. I feel I've talked about that before, so I won't say a lot about it, but one of the first things that I started telling people about Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism was that, in addition to complementing CBT and providing a deeper, more profound, more philosophical perspective on things, which is incredibly important because CBT is mainly conceptualized as a remedial approach, as a therapy, and we have resilience building or preventative approaches that are derived largely from CBT and related techniques. But Stoicism helps to deal with one of the problems that psychologists have encountered in this area, which is how can you develop a preventative approach which people don't just kind of do and then forget about, but embrace as a whole philosophy of life. But to do that, you kind of need something bigger than CBT. You need something that goes beyond CBT and gives them some of the things that they get from Buddhism or from Christianity or other big philosophies or religions. And Stoicism can offer that. It's not a scientific method in itself. It's more like a worldview, a set of core values. But that's part of the value of it, because that means that it offers us something that people are more likely to embrace as a whole way of life, as a permanent aspect of their thinking and lifestyle. And that's more likely to contribute to longer term resilience. One of the other things that helps in that respect is the fact that the Stoic literature is beautiful. Seneca in particular is one of the finest writers of antiquity. So the way that some of these passages are expressed, Marcus isn't kind of renowned as a great writer like Seneca, but he had a rigorous training in rhetoric, and as I mentioned before, we can see that shining through in certain passages depending on how they're translated. And so a very different style of writing, it's more like notes we have from Marcus. but nevertheless, many of those passages are memorized by people today. They really resonate with them, and so they're more likely to gain that kind of lasting benefit from them. I think that, not that many people get tattoos of quotes from an Albert Ellis book or a David Burns self-help book today, right? But people get tattoos of passages from Marcus Aurelius because they identify with it really deeply. Like it stays with them. James and I think some other people had mentioned the fifth of those, how the soul injures itself, which is when we kind of wander and we don't make all of our acts unified and purposeful, is one of the hardest things. And that's also one of the most important aspects. It's something that you see Marcus talking about over and over and over again in the Meditations, is this idea of having a kind of single unifying life goal. We didn't actually focus a lot on that aspect in this particular course. I might introduce more about it later, but it reminds me in particular of a particular behaviour therapy approach called valued living or behavioural activation in modern psychotherapy, which is used for various things, but it's mainly used as a treatment for clinical depression. And this aspect of Stoicism, which relates to our goals and values, can be particularly useful as a way of helping us to experience life in a more meaningful way. And that can help make people more resilient to feelings of despondency and depression. Although when I make these comparisons with psychotherapy and so on, I should mention, someone did ask me about this just the other day, that the reading the Stoics in this course as well aren't intended as a substitute for psychotherapy. I'd be obligated as a psychotherapist to emphasise to people that their first port of call, if they have clinical anxiety or depression, should be to have an assessment from a qualified professional. Nevertheless, like Stoicism can help people build resilience. It can help as an adjunct to psychotherapy. It can help with milder or subclinical forms of anxiety, depression, anger and other problems, and so it can serve that self-help function and a life philosophy function, but we have to attach the caveat that it's not a substitute for mainstream medicine. I think most people kind of take that for granted, but sometimes we need to kind of just like re-emphasize that caveat. So we can't present any of this stuff as in any way being a substitute for evidence-based psychotherapy. It wouldn't be ethical to do that. The discussion of another excerpt was included as well about Justus Lipsius and Antony, the third Earl of Shaftesbury. Mentioned before, I think in the last webinar, just because I want to just give you a brief introduction to those two figures, where it's kind of going beyond Marcus and the Meditations, but I think in a very important way, because the Earl of Shaftesbury's book in particular, not widely read, but I really think you'll love it if you love the Meditations. Then it's an amazing piece of literature. And the Philosophical Regimen by the Earl of Shaftesbury is the book I'm talking about. So I just wanted to give you a little flavour of that, and also because those passages I think really help to complement the view from above. James had mentioned that it's very liberating to view ourselves as limited in scope and duration, which is Stoicism is a paradoxical philosophy. For the ancient Greeks, a paradox was something actually, it meant something slightly different from what it means today. It meant it's something that runs counter to the opinions of the majority of people. So a kind of surprising or counterintuitive belief in Stoicism was full of these, kind of inherited from sort of like the Socratic philosophy, paradoxes that are associated with Socrates. And one of them is that when we kind of view our lives as small and transient, that it's actually the opposite of what people might think. Rather than being sort of depressing, it has the potential, if it's approached in the right way. And actually, I think for the majority of people that contemplate it in the Stoic way, virtually all of them find it a liberating and an empowering perspective to adopt, which is kind of counterintuitive at first, perhaps, but nevertheless that's the case. Timothy had mentioned something about having an interest in amateur astronomy, and I think that's an interesting point. I've often made the point that when the ancient Greeks were doing cosmology in general, when they were thinking about the creation of the whole universe and the nature of the whole universe in a kind of primitive way, I think they're often aware that in itself, as a branch of natural philosophy, is a psychological exercise. It has a spiritual or a psychological effect on them. And in the ancient world, when they would draw diagrams, for example, illustrating the planets, I think contemplating those had a kind of mind-expanding spiritual effect that people were recognised as such. There, just as a kind of odd illustration of that in a way, when ancient authors refer to maps, sometimes that they have this kind of perspective that there's something odd about looking even at a map and thinking how small the part of the world is that you occupy. In Aristophanes' play The Clouds, where he's ridiculing Socrates, he's kind of mocking Socrates, a contemporary of Socrates, he portrays Socrates as being in this kind of building called a thinkery, surrounded by his followers, kind of caricature of Socrates' circle, and he's suspended from a theatre crane looking down at maps that are on the floor, almost like it's intended as a caricature of this philosophical meditation, the view from above. And Timothy also mentioned this idea that Shaftesbury mentions about as kind of developing beyond the limited perspective of children to a broader perspective. And the Stoics do have this idea, particularly in De Finibus. Cato is portrayed as talking about the cradle argument in Stoicism, and this kind of Stoic, almost developmental moral psychology, I guess you could call it. And the idea that we are evolving, developing, maturing from childhood and broadening our perspective, and that in most cases that's kind of unfinished, and that the sage is kind of optimally mature, if you like, and most of us never really fully develop our potential. We kind of our lives are sort of half finished in that respect, and the sage is this hypothetical ideal of somebody who's taken the building blocks that were given in childhood and he's developed them in the way that they're meant to be developed to as far as it's possible to go with them. And as children, we're guided by our senses, and we're kind of aware of what's in front of us, and then we gradually learn to put ourselves in other people's shoes and think about things from different perspectives, and then we gradually learn just how big the world is. My own little girl at the moment, I know how hard it is for her, when she was a 5-year-old, and she's just beginning as a 6-year-old to kind of wrap her head around the idea of how big a country is or how big a continent is, and that's a very abstract idea for a small child. But as an adult, we take it for granted, and the Stoics are kind of saying, well, as we develop this broader perspective, like a true philosopher would really get to grips with cosmology and understand the whole of space and time, and as far as it's possible for us to do that, and think of himself from that perspective. Because anything less than that would be almost like a lie of omission, because we know that the universe is that big. It's the truth, if you like. Discussing strategies, how can Stoicism help us to come to terms with mortality and loss? James had said that thinking of brevity of life makes us focus more on what's important, and we can ask ourselves, is this really what I wanted to have accomplished? And that's an important aspect of it, certainly. The contemplation of death for the Stoics is intended to make us focus much more on doing what's most important in life. And some people think if you only had one day left to live, a lot of people think when you ask them what would you do, they kind of think, I'd go crazy and have a party and do all the kind of sensory things. I'd really indulge myself for the last day that I have left. But the Stoics think, well, paradoxically, if you've been training your mind, you really think about this, actually, a wise person would say, I'd use the last drop of life that I have to do the most important thing in life. and does it seem like the most important thing in life to me to kind of just indulge my senses and stuff, or maybe other things that I could potentially do. And so that's the kind of question that it prompts for the Stoics. Really, it forces us again onto this question of what is the good, what's the most important thing in life, what is virtue, what is flourishing, and how can I start enacting more of that right now. Laura said contemplating our own mortality creates a sense of gratitude also for life. We don't talk that much about gratitude in Stoicism, but it is an important aspect. Marcus talks about it a little bit, and I would say, that one way of understanding Stoicism would be thinking of it in terms of gratitude. That's not a word that's used. I don't think it really translates a word that the Stoics used to articulate what they were saying, but arguably it's kind of implicit in a lot of it. There are certainly passages in Marcus Aurelius where he talks about something that looks like an attitude of being grateful for things, and that I certainly think it's useful to talk about gratitude and relate it to Stoicism, because it also helps to highlight the role of positive emotion in Stoicism, which is sometimes neglected a little bit. It kind of fits in neatly with that aspect. And John had said that in his 60s, the Stoic attitude towards death resonated with him strongly, and reading the passages from Marcus on their own had a kind of calming effect on him. And I think that's true. I'd be interested. We have research that we do for modern Stoicism that's kind of ongoing. We've been doing it for about 5 years now through SMRT and Stoic Week. And Tim LeBon's published a lot of data, if you're interested, in several reports that you can find on the Modern Stoicism website. But I almost just as a slightly frivolous thing, I'd be curious to see what would happen if you just gave a bunch of people a copy of the Meditations and just did two things. Got them to read a chapter a week out of the Meditations, out of one of the modern translations, let's say, and also got them to discuss it in a peer support group, maybe online, without any other guidance whatsoever. And I'd be interested to measure the psychological, emotional effect that had, because normally we think you need to do more than that, you need to do skills training and stuff, but I do feel that people would possibly get some emotional benefit just from being given this book and told to read it systematically and discuss it with a bunch of other people that are reading it. I don't know, it'd be interesting to know what your views are about that. I think guidance is important, but I wonder whether people would get some benefit even without the guidance, just from the power of the literature. That would be quite remarkable, because it's a book that's nearly 2,000 years old. Okay, so those are all the things that I wanted to cover today, basically. I said the webinar would be a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to wrap things up, and then I'm going to go to the Facebook group, and I'm going to start a little Ask Me Anything about Marcus Aurelius. So you're welcome. I'll probably pop in periodically throughout the day this afternoon, maybe check in a little bit over the next few days as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them there, and that gives me a little bit more time as well to think about responses and include references and stuff maybe. So thanks once again to everybody for taking part, and thanks for all of your feedback and the surveys and emails that people have sent me as well. And also thanks for participating in the discussions and helping the other students as well, because that's really important. Nearly 350 comments have been posted in total just over the past 4 weeks. There's probably like 800 comments already in total that have been posted on the course. And so I'd encourage you to continue using the Facebook group as well, because most of the students on this course and from the previous iteration of it have been there. And I'll be revising this course again in the future. I'll be running again in about 6 months' time, so there'll be another cohort of students going through it, and you'll be able to see their discussions, and you'll be able to attend those webinars if you choose to do so. So there'll be more videos, more content going into it, which I'll announce by email. And also for those of you who are interested in modern Stoicism, SMRT, people keep asking me about. Sorry. Stoic Mindfulness and Resilience Training. I'm struggling actually this year to schedule it, but I was hoping it would run around about June or July. So that's a free course. Follow Modern Stoicism on Twitter. It's at Stoic Week, and you'll get updates about things like that there, or just look at the modernstoicism.com website. And if you're interested, that might be running. Stoic Week will always be running. That runs in October this year, I think. And if you're interested, if you're based in London or interested in travelling there, John Sellers, who's the author of a couple of books on Stoicism, he's a lecturer in philosophy. I think he was at King's College in London. I'm not sure if he's still there, but he's a professional philosophy lecturer and one of the leading authorities in Stoicism. He will be organising Stoicon, the Modern Stoicism conference this year, and so you might be interested in going along and hearing John and some other well-known authors in the field of Stoicism speaking, and I'll probably be attending and delivering a presentation at that as well. So that's all that I have to cover today. Again, I really hope you enjoyed the course, and thanks very much for taking part, and I will look forward to maybe seeing some of you in the future at Stoicon, and maybe dropping in today for the Ask Me Anything about Marcus Aurelius in the Facebook group. Okay, cheers then everyone, bye bye.